I started my residency at St. Bartholomew's Medical Center 6 months ago, and I still get lost in its hallways. The place is a maze of mismatched renovations, narrow passageways, and storage closets that don't match the building blueprints. Every resident has their horror story about being paged to a non-existent room or walking into a utility closet labeled as an OR. My horror story didn't start with a mistake. It started with a routine. I was doing my third solo night shift, covering internal medicine patients while the rest of the hospital slept. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I was the only doctor on our floor. I had a simple rotation: check on the 3 post-op patients in room 211A, B, and C, chart vitals, administer medications. I made my rounds every 2 hours, like clockwork. Except one night, I noticed something strange. I was finishing up in 211C when I heard a voice, very faint, from the room next door. There isn't a room next door. I checked the floor plan. Room 211 ends at C. Past that is supposed to be a storage area, and then a dead wall, one that faces the alley behind the east wing. But the voice was unmistakable. Soft, dry, whispering something I couldn't understand. I waited. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was the old HVAC wheezing again, or a delirious patient next door. But then it spoke again. "Doctor!" I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Male, older. It had a gravelly tone that suggested dehydration or maybe a trach. I backed out of 211C and walked into the hall, looking for another nurse or anyone else on shift. Empty. The hallway lights flickered faintly, and I hated how quiet the building had become. The voice came again. "Doctor, please!" It was followed by the faintest sound of movement, something shifting against cloth. Like a bed sheet being pulled. A patient, I thought. Maybe someone had gotten stuck in the old wing. I followed the sound. Past the marked rooms, to where the hall narrowed and dipped slightly, an architectural quirk that was never explained. At the end of the dim corridor, the wall was darker than it should have been. I thought maybe the emergency lights had blown out. Then I realized it wasn't just a wall. There was a door. Faint and unmarked, no sign, no room number. It wasn't on the blueprint I'd studied endlessly during my first weeks. But there it was. I knocked hesitantly. "This is Dr. Collin." "Hello? Are you all right in there?" The voice didn't answer this time. But the door creaked open on its own. Just a few inches. I should have called for security. I should have walked away. But instead, I stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from an exposed wire. It swung gently, casting moving shadows on the walls. There was a bed in the center, hospital standard, older model. And someone was in it. Elderly, male, gaunt, wearing a faded hospital gown. His eyes were shut. I approached carefully. "Sir? Can you hear me?" His eyes didn't open, but he spoke. "Not yet." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" He didn't respond. Just turned his head slightly, revealing a large bruise under his left eye. I reached for my penlight and checked his vitals. No pulse, no breath sounds, no rise and fall of the chest. But his eyes fluttered. Just barely. I backed away, heart pounding. My pager buzzed violently at my hip. I looked down. 211D code blue. There's no 211D. But there was. That night, there was. I stumbled back out into a hallway, the door swinging shut behind me with a heavy finality that didn't match the frailty of its frame. My hands were shaking. I looked around. The corridor was empty. No nurses, no orderlies, just that unsettling hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beep of machines monitoring people who may or may not wake up. I stared at the closed door. No label. No window. I tried to open it again. Locked. I knocked harder this time, voice cracking. "Sir? Are you still in there?" Silence. The hallway around me felt thicker. Like the air had changed texture. I ran back to the station and paged night security. It took them 13 minutes to show up. By the time the guy arrived, door still locked, I had convinced myself I'd imagined it. But I made him check with me anyway. When we returned to that hall, the door was gone. Not closed. Not sealed. Gone. A smooth stretch of drywall now covered the space where it had been. No seams, no knob, no frame. Like it had never existed. I blinked. The security guy gave me a look, like I was either sleep-deprived or lying. "Maybe you were in the wrong hallway," he offered. But I knew the layout. I knew that hallway. And I knew what I had seen. I didn't sleep the next day. I spent it pulling floor plans, hospital renovation records, asking longtime staff about room 211D. No one had heard of it. No record, no construction permits, no closures. But the more I asked, the more I noticed something else. People stopped answering. By the end of that week, I got pulled into a meeting with my supervisor, Dr. Ames. She smiled too tightly. "Colin, I understand you've had a stressful rotation. I just want to know if..." "There is no 211D," she interrupted. "Don't bring it up again." That night, I made rounds like usual. The patients in A, B, and C were stable. Their monitors chimed softly in the dark. But when I went to log their meds into the electronic system, the drop-down listed something odd under room assignments. 211D. Patient unknown. Status, code blue, 3:19 a.m. Assigned physician, Dr. Colin Brewer. That's my name. I clicked on the file. It blinked. Then vanished. Like it had never been there. Over the next few nights, things escalated. I'd find soiled gauze on the floor outside room C. Old-style 4 bags with no barcodes. Once, I saw a bed pushed halfway into the hallway, as if someone had tried to move it and given up. Then the voices came back. Always the same phrase. "Doctor, please," whispered in the same dry, desperate tone. Always from behind me. But when I turned around, no one was there. One night, while doing my rounds, I passed a mirror in the hallway. Standard issue safety glass, nothing unusual. But my reflection wasn't in sync. It blinked too late. It smiled when I wasn't. That was my last shift at St. Bartholomew's. I requested a transfer, citing stress and burnout. They didn't fight it. They didn't even ask why. Sometimes, late at night, I still get calls from blocked numbers. I don't answer, but they leave voicemails. Always silent. But when I listen closely with headphones, I can make out the faintest sound, a flatline tone. And after about 20 seconds, the same voice says it again. "Doctor, please." I didn't believe in hospital superstitions until I started my first year at Wexham General. People whispered about certain rooms, certain patients. Mostly old nurses with tired eyes. I ignored them. Until I got my first patient with initials instead of a name. It came in like a normal page. "New admit in 6B, psych eval requested." I was on night psych consult duty. 6th floor, behavioral. I was used to wandering through half-lit wards, dealing with people in various states of unraveling. But 6B was always empty. The doors were locked, the floor technically decommissioned. I even asked the nurse on 5 what the deal was. She shrugged. "Sometimes they use it for overflow or..." She lowered her voice. "Observation." I rode the elevator up alone. The doors opened on silence. The kind of silence that presses into your teeth. Room 6B03 had one flickering light. The patient sat in the corner. Male. Mid-30s maybe. Face hidden. Thin arms, hospital gown several sizes too large. His head was bowed like he was praying. I checked the chart clipped to the wall. Name, not applicable. Initials DS. DOB, unknown. Admission reason, found unresponsive in trauma base / began vocalizing in transport. Speech incomprehensible. Consult, psychiatry, night shift. I stepped in. He didn't look up. "Hi," I said gently. "I'm Dr. Abram. I'm here to talk if that's okay." Still nothing. I sat in the chair beside the bed and started with soft questions. Nothing formal. Just open space. He didn't answer, but something changed. The way his fingers twitched. The way he seemed to angle his face toward me slightly. After 10 minutes, I was ready to give up. I turned to grab my notes, when I heard it. Whispered, "Did you see it?" I froze. "What?" He didn't move. But the whisper again, clearer. "On the sheet. You didn't read it right." I turned back to the chart, confused. The clipboard was gone. In its place was a folded piece of paper I hadn't noticed before. Thin and white, like printer stock. I opened it. It wasn't printed. It was handwritten. Do not speak to him. Do not look into his eyes. Do not allow him to speak full sentences. If you read this note, leave immediately. I looked up. His eyes were open now. Just barely. And I swear to God, they were filled with something not light, but movement. Like there was something swimming behind them. He smiled. I stood. I'll be back. I need to. He spoke again, louder. It writes itself. Once you read it, you can't stop it. I backed away. The hallway behind me flickered. Something scratched across the floor, his nails, reaching forward. Don't let it through, he said, louder now. It uses our words. I slammed the door. Back in the stairwell, I checked the clipboard again. The paper was gone. The file had only one note now. Discharged. Time of death 11:59 p.m. Witness, Dr. Abram. Signature, DS. I hadn't signed anything. It wasn't 11:59 p.m. And he was still alive when I left the room. I didn't go back to 6B. I submitted my consult note through the electronic system, kept it vague. Patient unresponsive, further evaluation needed. I didn't mention the sheet. Or the signature. Or the whisper. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I even checked the morgue records. No one named DS had died. I chalked it up to stress, maybe a prank. That was easier to believe than the alternative, that something had signed my name on a death certificate while I was still standing outside the door. I went back to work, normal shifts, normal patients. But then I found the sheet again. Folded between 2 pages of a discharge summary. Same paper. Same handwriting. Do not speak to him. Do not look into his eyes. Do not allow him to speak full sentences. No name. No initials. Just the warning. I thought someone was messing with me. Maybe a colleague saw how rattled I was and decided to keep it going. I confronted my co-resident Emma, the only other night psych intern. She swore she didn't know anything. But when I mentioned 6B, she went quiet. That floor's not supposed to be used, she said. It's not. But someone was up there. Her voice dropped. Do you remember the resident who quit last year? Mikey Lane? I nodded. Went full ghost mode, yeah. He was assigned a consult on 6B the night before he disappeared. My stomach turned. I asked if she remembered the initials. She didn't answer. That night, I found a third copy of the sheet, this one folded neatly into my lab coat pocket. No one could have put it there. I hadn't taken my coat off all day. I unfolded it slowly, already knowing what it would say. If you read this note, leave immediately. But this one had something new scribbled in the margins. It copies. It needs readers. That's how it moves. I threw it away. Burned it, actually, behind the loading dock. Watched the paper curl and blacken. I felt like a lunatic. But it felt right. Until I opened my email the next morning. Subject, auto-generated copy, 6B observation note. Attached, whispersheet.pdf. I didn't open it. I couldn't. Instead, I reported my ID stolen and had IT wipe my terminal. I filed a formal request to transfer departments. They approved it within 24 hours. Here's the part one haven't told anyone. Sometimes, when I hand patients their discharge paperwork, they hesitate. Not long. Just a pause, like something catches their eye. Then they look up at me, face blank, and ask, Did you see it? I don't answer. I just smile and nod, and get the hell out. Because if I respond, even just to say no, they always follow up with the same thing. It writes itself. Once you read it, you can't stop it. That's how I know they saw the sheet too. And now I'm telling you. So if you ever find a folded piece of paper, no title, just handwritten instructions, don't read it. Because it's not a warning. It's an invitation. You learn early in residency that not all patients tell you the real reason they came in. They talk around it. They use vague language, sometimes even unrelated complaints. The truth only emerges in pieces, if at all. Mr. Thomas Wilburn was one of those patients. He came in during my third overnight shift of the week, an older man, 57, with a lean frame, smoker's cough, and hands that trembled slightly when he reached for the clipboard. He was scheduled for a follow-up after an ER visit 6 days earlier, chest tightness, dizziness, mild confusion. His vitals had normalized, and nothing on his scans was remarkable. He was discharged with instructions to rest and hydrate. He said he came back because something didn't feel right. That was how he phrased it. What do you mean by that? I asked. He looked up slowly. His eyes were bloodshot, but not from sleep deprivation. They were dry, as though he hadn't blinked in hours. I don't know how to say it exactly, he murmured. Everything's misaligned. Like I'm inside someone else. I waited, thinking he was joking, or delusional. Do you mean emotionally? Like you're disconnected? I prompted. He shook his head. Not like depression or anything. More like I'm using a body that isn't mine. I tried to ask questions that might help clarify. Hallucinations, sleep patterns, medications, recent trauma, but he wasn't forthcoming. He just kept returning to the same phrase. It doesn't fit right anymore. His chart didn't offer much. All vitals were within range. His chest X-ray from the ER visit had been clean except for some mild pulmonary scarring, nothing unexpected in a long-time smoker. Neurologically, he was intact. No signs of stroke. No recent medications that could explain delusions. Still, I ordered a few tests, CBC, CT of the head, even a tox screen, just to rule things out. As we waited, I stayed in the room, partly because I was curious and partly because something about the man unsettled me. What happened during your ER visit? I asked him. He was silent for a while, then said, I remember seeing the lights in the ceiling when they wheeled me in. I remember the smell of antiseptic. The beep of the monitors. And then... He paused. His eyes shifted downward. I remember dying. I blinked. You mean you lost consciousness? He shook his head again. No. I mean I was gone. Like out of body. I saw them try to resuscitate me. I saw myself. My instinct was to redirect him, but I didn't. He wasn't agitated, wasn't spiraling. He was telling me a story, calm and flat like it had happened to someone else. And then I woke up, he said. In the ER? He looked me dead in the eye. No. I woke up the next morning. In my bed. But it wasn't me. I don't sleep in that bed. I don't own that apartment. I don't have a scar on my chest. But I did when I woke up. I frowned. You think you're in someone else's body? He nodded. And I don't know how long I have before it notices. I didn't know what to say to that. I documented the conversation in his chart and flagged it for psychiatric consult. As I left the room, I heard him mutter something behind me. I paused in the hallway to listen. The words were muffled, almost a whisper. Just looking for a place to stay. I had to shake it off. Maybe it was a delusion. Maybe I was just tired. But later that night, I checked his file again. And that's when I saw it. A note buried in the ER logs from 6 days ago. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. Pronouncing physician, Dr. Abram. That was me. I had never written that note. I had never pronounced anyone dead that night. But someone had signed my name. And the timestamp matched the exact moment he said he died. I didn't sleep the day after I saw the death note. I couldn't. My brain kept cycling through everything he said, the scar he didn't remember getting, the apartment that wasn't his, the feeling of not fitting right. And that phrase he whispered, just looking for a place to stay. It lodged in my mind like a sliver. I spent my day off combing through Wilburn's medical history. The chart confirmed he'd been admitted to the ER 6 nights ago, triaged for dizziness and confusion. But then the record glitched. There was a blank space in the time log between 3 a.m. and 3:30 a.m., no notes, no vitals, just a single entry. Code Blue initiated, 3:14 a.m. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. Pronounced by Dr. Abram. I know where I was at that time. Sleeping in the call room. I wasn't even paged that night. I tried to delete the note, thinking maybe it was a clerical error, a misassigned ID. But the system wouldn't let me. Modification restricted, record locked by attending. I emailed the attending physician from that shift, Dr. Hartley. I asked if he remembered Wilburn or if there'd been any issues with records. His reply came 20 minutes later. Just one sentence. We don't talk about the ones who come back. I stared at that line until my screen went dark from inactivity. The next night, I was back on call. I kept checking the ER board obsessively. Around 2:30 a.m., a new name popped up. Wilburn, Thomas, unresponsive/collapse in transit. I froze. No room number. No vitals logged. Just his name and en route. I ran down to the ER, heart pounding, unsure if I was scared for him or scared of him. They were wheeling him in when I arrived. Same man. Same pale face. Same gray hospital gown, though no one could explain where he'd gotten it. The triage nurse, Angela, leaned toward me. They said he was found outside an abandoned building. He kept saying he needed a doctor. I walked beside the gurney. His eyes flickered open. Not in pain. Not afraid. Just tired. You again, he said. I didn't respond. You never asked what happened to the real Wilburn. I shook my head. I don't want to know. He smiled faintly. He left. Or he was pushed out. Doesn't really matter. We got him into a room and hooked him up to telemetry. I watched the monitor out of the corner of my eye. His vitals were fine. Too fine, actually, like textbook normal. No variability. No arrhythmias. No motion artifacts. Just perfect. I sat beside his bed. What are you? He turned his head slowly. A passenger. I look for places that are empty. Not dead, just vacant. You'd be surprised how many people just walk out of themselves. I felt a chill trace the length of my spine. But you can't stay, can you? I asked. Not for long. He nodded. They push back. Eventually. The shell remembers it's occupied. The monitor beside him began to stutter, tiny irregular beats like someone tapping a Morse code warning. I thought this one would last longer. He whispered. But he's coming back now. The line spiked. Alarms blared. Code blue. Nurses rushed in. I didn't move. I watched as his body began to convulse, not violently, but with a strange rhythm, like someone trying to shake themselves awake from deep underwater. Then he opened his mouth and screamed. But it wasn't a human sound. It was layered, like 3 voices at once, one pleading, one furious, and one that sounded like me. The monitor flatlined. They worked on him for 16 minutes. Eventually, Dr. Hartley called time of death. 3:31 a.m. Name unknown male. Estimated age 50 to 60. Notes. Subject bore resemblance to previous patient Thomas Wilburn, declared deceased 6 days prior. There's no burial record. No family contacted. He was logged, tagged, and stored. I've moved hospitals since then. But once in a while, I check death logs across the state. Every so often, I see a name. Wilburn T. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. Again and again. I think he's still looking. Not for help. but for someone empty enough to stay in. When you're a junior attending, people expect you to be calm, confident, unshakable. But there's a specific kind of dread that only hits when you realize something's wrong, and it's written in your own handwriting. It started with a routine audit. Every month, the hospital requires us to review random patient charts. I pulled 6 at random, logged in from the workroom around 2 a.m. with a mug of half-cold coffee and eyes barely open. 5 were uneventful, surgical follow-ups, stable discharges, normal outcomes. But the 6th one didn't have a name. Just a chart number. Number 453806. Room, not applicable. Physician of record, Dr. Michael Reyes, me. Admission date, February 14th, 2:16 a.m. Diagnosis, observation hold/unresponsive. Status, active. I stared at it. The date was 3 nights ago. The timestamp matched the end of my last shift. But I had no memory of admitting a patient that night, especially not one without a name. I clicked into the progress notes. They were all blank. Except for one. February 14th, 2:19 a.m. Entered by Dr. Michael Reyes. Patient continues to resist. Tends to disappear when watched too long. Reappears if ignored. Recommend dim lighting. I didn't write that. It was in my login, but I had no memory of ever typing those words. And the phrasing, it didn't sound like me. It sounded clinical, detached, and faintly frightened. I checked the vitals tab. There were no entries. No heart rate, no BP, not even a temperature log. Under observations, 1 line. Patient does not blink. I stood, pulled up the tracking board, and searched the hospital for chart number 453806. The system showed no assigned room. But as I backed out of the file, a new notification popped up. Chart 6 updated, new note entered. I clicked it immediately. February 17th, 2:28 a.m. Dr. Reyes is reviewing again. He knows. Proceed. I stood up so fast my chair slammed into the wall behind me. I spun around, half expecting someone to be behind me in the room. Empty. The lights above the hallway flickered, as they often did at night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I reported the chart to IT and flagged it for manual review. They assured me it was probably a system error, leftover documentation from a cancelled patient encounter. But something didn't add up. I checked my old shift logs. On the night in question, I had clocked out at 2:14 a.m., 2 minutes before the note had been entered under my name. I stared at that line again. Tends to disappear when watched too long. Reappears if ignored. It read more like a warning than an observation. That night, I dreamed I was back at work. Walking down an unfamiliar hallway. All the lights were dimmed, the doors unlabeled. A quiet, methodical beeping followed me from behind. And then I saw it, someone standing at the far end of the corridor. Not walking. Just waiting. Face blurred. Limbs slightly too long. Head tilted as if curious. I turned to run, and the hallway twisted into itself like a spiral. I couldn't tell where the walls ended or began. I woke in a sweat at 2:28 a.m. My work phone buzzed. One notification. Chart 6 updated, new observation. The morning after that notification, I went straight to the hospital records department. I told them I needed full access to chart number 453806, including metadata, who created it, who accessed it, and from which terminal. They looked at me like I was overreacting, but eventually pulled the data. Here's what I found. The chart was created from my login. From my computer. 2 minutes after I had already clocked out that night. Even more unsettling? The access log showed the chart being reviewed intermittently every night since then, always between 2:14 and 2:29 a.m. Every time, it was accessed under my credentials, even when I wasn't at the hospital. The system flagged the logins as legitimate, but I hadn't been there. I asked to speak to IT security. They told me my badge had been scanned at odd hours in the West Wing, specifically in the old radiology annex, which hadn't been in use since they closed it last spring due to asbestos concerns. I asked if there were security cameras. Only in the hallways, they said. Nothing in that wing itself. That night I stayed late. I waited until 2 a.m., logged into the system, and opened Chart 6 again. This time, there was no patient file. Just a blinking text cursor at the top of the screen. As I watched, letters began to appear. Slowly. Deliberately. Observation resumed. Subject aware. Then, keep watching. Do not turn away. I didn't touch the keyboard. The room suddenly felt colder. A shadow moved in my peripheral vision, just a flicker, in the far corner of the workroom. When I turned to look, nothing was there. But the cursor on the screen started again. You looked away. I slammed the laptop shut and ran down to the security office. We pulled footage from the hallway outside the West Wing. What we saw made the room go quiet. At 2:16 a.m., I appeared on screen. Walking into the hallway. Alone. Calm. Except I hadn't left the workroom. I was watching myself from another room on the same floor. At the exact same time. In the footage, I walked up to the locked annex doors, swiped my badge, and slipped inside. No one else entered or left. I went home that night shaking. I started leaving all electronics unplugged. Covered mirrors. Slept with the lights on. 2 nights later, I was called in for a patient consult. Room listed. Radiology, OB3. I refused. Told the nurse it must be a mistake. She gave me a strange look. Weird, she said. Because someone signed you in already. I checked the logs. My name. My badge. But my badge was still clipped to my own lab coat. I didn't sleep after that. A week later, I got a notification. Chart 6, discharge note entered. I opened it. My hands were trembling. Subject replaced. Observation complete. Chart closed. Thank you, Dr. Reyes. There was no patient file anymore. No chart number. No digital footprint at all. Just one last thing. A new attending logged into our system the next week. Same schedule as mine. Same subspecialty. Different name. But when I passed him in the hallway, I froze. Because he looked at me. Exactly the way I used to look at patients when I didn't understand what was wrong yet. And for a split second, he smiled like he did. It started during a morbidity and mortality conference. If you're not in medicine, that might sound sinister, but it's a routine thing. We review recent cases, especially ones with bad outcomes, to learn from them. No blame, just education. I was sitting in the 3rd row, next to Dr. Ng and one of the new interns. The lights were dimmed, and the projector flicked through the title slides. The presenting resident, Lisa, 4th year, sharp as hell, stood confidently at the podium. Today we'll review the death of a 43-year-old male who presented with confusion and fever. Initial diagnosis was meningitis. The outcome was fatal. She clicked to the next slide, case timeline. Except it wasn't. The slide was black. Then a flicker of static. Then a photo, not medical. Not anything that belonged in a presentation. It was a dim image of a hospital hallway. Ours. But from an odd angle, like from behind a partially closed door. Lisa frowned and tapped the laptop. Sorry, wrong file. She clicked again. Another image. This one of a hospital bed. Empty. Sheets rumpled. Taken from high up in a corner, like a security camera shot. Another click. Another image. Now a close-up of a door marked staff only. The handle was smeared with something dark. Maybe rust. Maybe something else. The room fell silent. Lisa stepped back. That's not mine. She tried to close the slideshow, but it wouldn't respond. Then, over the speakers, a low sound began to play. Not speech. Not static. Just a long, breathy exhale. Repeating. Slowly. One of the interns stood up and left the room. Everyone else just stared. The final image appeared. A face. not looking at the camera, pressed against it. Eyes wide, glassy, skin pale and stretched too tightly. Lips cracked. Pupils huge. It looked aware. Not posed. Not dead. The screen went black. The lights flicked on. The laptop rebooted itself. Lisa stood frozen, one hand gripping the lectern so hard her knuckles turned white. We all sat in stunned silence until the attending cleared his throat and said, "Let's take a break." I pulled Lisa aside. "You didn't make that file?" She shook her head. "It wasn't on the drive. My case ended before I even got to the ICU. That patient wasn't mine." Later, I asked the IT team if they could trace where the images came from. They said the presentation was uploaded from the resident workstation, but the file wasn't in her folder. It had been generated from a temp directory, timestamped 2:43 a.m. the night before. Lisa was asleep at home. I couldn't stop thinking about the images. Especially the hallway one. I knew that hallway. It was the passage between the ICU and radiology, one I walked every night. So the next night, I went there. I stood where the photo must have been taken, just behind the old med supply room door. It felt too quiet. I snapped a picture with my phone. It came out black. Then, as I stared at the screen, something bright flashed, just for a second. A pale oval, near the floor. I lowered my phone. Nothing there. Then, behind me, I heard a door creak open. But every door on that floor has been keypad locked since 2021. I didn't report the incident. Who would I report it to? Hey, someone hacked a slide deck and inserted surveillance photos of a ghost. That'd get me flagged for a psych eval faster than an intern misplacing narcotics. But I couldn't let it go. I went back to that hallway during the day. It looked different in daylight, shorter, narrower, almost benign. But when I compared it to the slide image I'd managed to screenshot from Lisa's corrupted presentation, something was wrong. In the photo, there were 5 doors along the right wall. In reality, there were only 4. I counted twice. 3 patient rooms and 1 linen closet. I pulled up the hospital blueprints. They confirmed it, 4 doors. No 5th. But the image showed 1 more, at the end of the hallway, just before the fire exit. It had no label. No number. Just a handle, barely visible in the low light. I asked maintenance if there had ever been remodeling. They said no. That wall had been untouched since the ICU opened. I went back again, alone, at night. The 5th door was there. I didn't see it from the main hallway, only when I stood in the exact same angle as the photograph, peeking from behind the med supply door. It was matte gray. Narrower than standard. No label. No keycard reader. Just a single, dark peephole in the center. My pulse spiked. I stepped closer, hand reaching out before I could stop myself. Then I heard the breathing again, faint, like from a cracked vent. I pressed my ear to the door. And I heard someone whisper my name. I ran. The next morning, I found an email in my inbox. No sender. No subject. Just a .zip attachment labeled conf case_redacted. Inside were 4 files. 3 were photographs, low-res, grainy surveillance shots of various hospital rooms. The 4th was a PDF of the original presentation from the M&M conference. Except this version had extra slides, ones we never saw. Slides documenting a patient who didn't exist in our system. Patient unknown, see audit trail. Initial assessment, responsive to surveillance. Unresponsive to direct intervention. Avoids sustained eye contact. Notes, appears only when viewed indirectly. Tends to imprint on medical staff who see it. Status unresolved. Final slide. Recommendation, continue observation through proxy. I closed the file and turned off my monitor. My hands were shaking. Over the next few nights, I noticed small changes. Hallway mirrors angled wrong. Reflection delays. My ID badge beeped twice at doors instead of once. Sometimes, while dictating notes, my voice would echo faintly in my ears, as if someone else was whispering it back a second behind. Then I got a new assignment from the senior resident. Audit follow-up. Chart number 000000. Location, not applicable. Status, active. Assigned, Dr. M. Reyes. That wasn't a real chart number. It couldn't be. The system doesn't use zeros like that. I clicked it anyway. The page was blank. Except for one line in bold. Observer acknowledged. Subject has entered the protocol. Do not close your eyes for longer than 8 seconds. I deleted the file. Cleared my history. Turned off my pager. But it didn't matter. Because now, every time I blink for too long in a dark room, I feel something behind me. Breathing. Waiting. And the next time I'm asked to present a case at conference, I know what will happen. The lights will dim. The projector will flicker. And somewhere, in the audience, something will finally see me.